Although the subtotal feature is helpful to display aggregates by categories, it is limited in functionality. For more thorough analysis of the sociology textbook sales, you create and modify a pivot table. You use the data on the Books Data worksheet as the data source to create a pivot table for the sociology department book sales. To create a pivot table, you need to use a regular range of data, not one that has been subtotaled. To save time, you select a recommended pivot table from the Recommended Pivot Tables dialog box to set up the initial pivot table. You selected this pivot table to show the overall total book sales for each discipline. The dialog box shows a preview of the selected pivot table. Excel inserts a new sheet named Sheet 1 for the pivot table. Rename the sheet to Pivot Table. The pivot table is on the left side, and the pivot table field list displays on the right side of the screen. After selecting a recommended pivot table, you want to compare sales combinations by discipline, copyright year, and edition. Excel displays the total book sales by a combination of discipline and edition. This enables you to compare sales of current editions within each discipline. Blanks appear in the pivot table when a discipline does not have a specific edition. For example, the family discipline does not have any first edition books currently being published. You drag the copyright field to place between the discipline and book title fields in the rows area to create subcategories for the discipline field. Currently, the copyright and book titles are not showing in the pivot table because they are collapsed within the discipline rows. However, you can click an Expand button to see details for a category. When you expand the Aging Death discipline, the pivot table displays the copyright years and books for each copyright year within the Aging Death discipline. Although it is informative to compare sales by edition, you will simplify the pivot table by removing some of the fields. Remove the edition field to consolidate sales data into one column. You removed the book title field because you want to display aggregate, not individual sales data. This arrangement consolidates the data better. Instead of repeating the copyright years for each discipline, the copyright years are listed only one each at the top of the sales columns. You want to improve the appearance of the sociology book pivot table. The Value Field Settings dialog box opens so that you can format the field. First, you type Sales by Discipline as a custom label for the calculated field. Excel opens a Format Cells dialog box with only the Number tab. You applied a counting number format with 0 decimal places to the values in the pivot table. You replaced the generic row labels heading with discipline to describe the contents of the first column, and you replaced the column labels heading with copyright year. Finally, you horizontally center the copyright year labels over their values. After consulting with the accounting department, you realize the retail prices are incorrect. You need to change the retail price percentage and then update the pivot table. Go back to the Books Data worksheet to change the value. Change the 130% to 125% in the input cell. Now go back to the pivot table. Notice that the pivot table does not update automatically. You have to use the refresh option to update the pivot table values based on the changes in the dataset. Because you want more flexibility in analyzing the sociology book sales data, you created a pivot table from the dataset. After creating the initial pivot table, you added fields to the rows and columns to provide more details to review. After reviewing those details, you removed and rearranged the remaining fields to focus on the total book sales for copyright years for each discipline. Finally, you updated an input value in original worksheet and refreshed the pivot table to reflect the change.